Cris runs away. Deacon Brown carried on two important kinds of business. He bought and sold cattle, and he ran a chandler's shop for making candles. In time, Cris became a good judge of cattle and was allowed to buy and sell cattle on his own. When he wasn't buying and selling cattle, he worked in the chandler's shop. In general, he hardly realized that he was a slave, except that he couldn't come and go without reporting. At first, he greatly missed his family and friends back at his old home. He lived so far away that he couldn't go to see them often. Now he had to make new friends. In making new friends, he met people doing several new and different kinds of work. Among others, he had an opportunity to become acquainted with shipbuilders and sailors, some of whom came from Boston. The better he came to know these persons, the more interested he became in working on ships and going to sea. As time passed, Deacon Brown came to trust Cris more and more and allowed him great freedom. He allowed him to travel widely to look after business. Sometimes he allowed him to go to Boston to visit places along the Massachusetts coast by boat. Cris greatly enjoyed these trips, especially taking voyages from Boston to other ports along the Massachusetts coast. At the same time, he heard many things about seafaring that he had never known before. The more that he learned about it, the more interested he became. Everything about it seemed exciting. In time, Cris began to learn the names of some of the ships. He learned which ships came to Boston regularly and which came only now and then. Somehow seeing these ships seemed to make him want more than ever to become free. Someday he would slip aboard one of these ships and sail away, never to return. By now, Cris was a huge man, powerful and brave, almost to recklessness. He was handsome, jolly, and made friends wherever he went. Now and then he made trips to Framingham to visit his parents and some of his old friends. His parents were proud of him and thought that he was satisfied with his new life. After 10 years of faithful service to Deacon Brown, Cris felt that he had earned the right to be free. He was ready to become a sailor and had even decided what kind of ship he wanted to sail on. One of the leading industries of the New England colonies was whaling or fishing for whales. Adventurous sea captains and their crews sailed the seven seas in specially built vessels, searching for whales. When the whales were caught, they were cut up and their blubber or fat was boiled to obtain an oil known as sperm oil. One whale would yield at least 80 barrels of sperm oil. The sperm oil was used largely for making candles. In those days, the candles were used because most people used candles for lighting their homes. Deacon Brown used large quantities of sperm oil in his chandler shop. In his work for Deacon Brown, Cris learned much about the whaling industry. He liked the idea of whaling and became eager to work on a whaling vessel. He realized, however, that he couldn't work on a vessel that would come back to Boston. If he left, he could never return. Cris studied carefully at all the whaling ships that came into Boston. He wanted to know which ones called Boston home and which ones called other ports home. He was interested in ships that had never come to Boston before. Finally, he found the right ship and decided definitely to run away. The ship was new to Boston and probably would never return. The day before the ship was to leave, Cris hid near the wharf. When evening came, he decided to board the ship and talk with Captain Folger, who owned the ship. He would ask Captain Folger if he could join his crew. "Good evening, sir," Cris said boldly, not as a slave, but as any other man might speak. "I would like to join your crew." Captain Folger studied the young man very carefully. Cris was just the sort of crewman he needed, but even in the darkness he could see that Cris had a strange complexion. At first he said nothing, but he wondered whether Cris was a free man or whether he was a slave. He didn't want to get any trouble by choosing someone slave for his crew. At last he asked, "Do you live around here?" "Of course, sir," Cris said quickly. He held his breath, waiting to see whether the captain believed him. He could feel hot blood running in his veins and pounding in his head. Did the captain suspect that he was a slave trying to run away? The captain came closer and looked directly into Chris's eyes, as if to find out whether or not Cris was telling the truth. Cris stood erect, almost afraid to breathe. "I've never been here before and never intend to return," said the captain. "I'm a stranger here, so I need to ask questions. I want to leave in the morning and I can't afford to have trouble." He still looked carefully at Cris as if trying to decide something about him. Actually, the captain was afraid that Cris was a slave, but he didn't want to ask Cris. All the slaves he had seen were black, but Cris was olive. "I can't afford to have trouble," the captain muttered almost to himself. "You won't have any trouble, sir," Cris said. "I was born down in the turnpike not far from here. My parents still live there. They know that I want to become a sailor and want me to succeed. If you employ me, I'll work hard as a member of your crew." Just at this moment, Deacon Brown and two other men came walking toward the ship. Cris saw them and was too frightened to continue speaking, even if he had wanted to. He wished that he could break away and run, but he was almost too frightened to move. Would the deacon come aboard and find him? Deacon Brown and the two men came closer to the ship, but Cris pretended not to look at them. The captain saw them and said, "I see I have visitors coming. Well, I'll take you," and motioned for Cris to go on below. And then he noticed that Cris looked extremely pale. "What's the trouble? Do you feel sick?" "Yes, sir. I feel a little sick," said Cris, "but I'll feel better soon. You see, I haven't eaten all day, waiting for a chance to talk to you." Cris had thought that he had more courage and was surprised to feel afraid. Now he didn't know whether he wanted his freedom or not. "Go down below," said Captain Folger, "and ask the cook to feed you. I can't afford to lose a good whaler." He gave Cris a gentle shove toward the steps to the lower deck. Cris was so weak that he almost fell down the steps. As Cris disappeared, he could see the deacon and his friends coming aboard. Why was the deacon coming here, he wondered. This was a strange ship, and the deacon didn't know Captain Folger. Cris decided to wait on the steps and listen to find out what the deacon wanted. "May I help you, gentlemen?" he heard the captain say. "Yes, you may," the deacon replied. "How long will you be in port?" "Not very long," the captain replied. "I plan to leave at dawn tomorrow. Is there anything I can do for you?" Deacon Brown hesitated, then said, "I'm trying to buy sperm oil. I own a chandler's shop not far from here and was hoping I could purchase some oil from you." "I wish that I could help you," said the captain, "but I have sold all my oil." "Possibly you'll have some next time," said the deacon. "Will you be back soon?" Cris knew that this ship was not supposed to return to Boston, but he held his breath until the captain replied, "No, I won't be back soon. I'm off course and don't belong here, but my friend Captain Drover should be here in a few days. He will have a great deal of oil. Will that help you?" "No, I need oil immediately," replied the deacon. "If you haven't any, I'll send my man Cris to Nantucket tomorrow to get some. Thank you." Cris heard the deacon moving toward the gangplank, with the two men behind him. Captain Folger followed them to see them off safely. "Good night," said the deacon. "Good night to you," said Captain Folger. Cris heaved a sigh of relief and went on to find the cook. His knees were still weak, and he felt ashamed for having been so frightened. If he was to be a free man, he would need to have courage and keep a cool head. On October 2nd, 1750, several days after Captain Folger had put out to sea, a notice appeared in the Boston Gazette. It read as follows: ran away from his master, William Brown of Framingham, on the 30th of September. Last, a mulatto fellow about 27 years of age, named Crispus, 6 feet and 2 inches high, short curled hair, his knees nearer together than common, and had on a light-colored beaver skin coat, plain new buckskin breeches, blue yarn stockings, and a checkered woolen shirt. Whoever shall take up said runaway and convey him to his aforesaid master shall have 10 pounds old tenure reward, and all necessary charges paid, and all masters of vessels and others are hereby cautioned against concealing or carrying off said servant on penalty of law. At first Deacon Brown could scarcely believe that Cris had run away. He had sent Cris to Boston many times on business, but Cris had always returned on schedule. He had thought that Cris was happy with his work and that he had never thought of running away. The deacon went to the colonel's farm to talk with Prince and his wife, but neither of them could tell him anything. They knew that early Cris had wanted to work on ships, but knew nothing of his later plans to run away. They were so much surprised as the deacon. Secretly, Prince was glad that Cris was gone. He felt that Cris now would have a chance to lead the kind of life that he had always wanted to lead. His wife felt differently. She was worried about Cris and prayed for his safety.